Senate will come to order. Let's go back to work. Before we do, I have a brief announcement here. Folks, in your red folders, the governor's appointments. Here you go. We've received the governor's appointments and they have been distributed to your desk in your red folders. We will be voting on these next Tuesday, March 8th, following 5 days of consideration. Consider wisely. Okay. Reports from standing committees.
March 1, 2022, Mr. Presidential Committee Number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, to whom is referred House Bill 52 engrossed, timeline to prepare and process absentee ballots. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Boner, Driscoll, Nethercott, and Scott. No, Senator Case. Senator Driscoll, Chairman. March 1, 2022, Mr. President, Committee Number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, to whom is referred House Bill 87, Insurance Investments Amendments. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Boner, Case, Driscoll, Nethercott, and Scott. Senator Driscoll, Chairman. March 1, 2022, Mr. President, Committee Number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, to whom was referred House Bill 49 engrossed, Election Reporting Requirements. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Boner, Driscoll, Nethercott, and Scott. No, Senator Case. Senator Driscoll, Chairman. March 1, 2022, Mr. President, Committee Number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, to whom was referred House Bill 80, Campaign Reports Amendments. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Boner, Case, Driscoll, Nethercott, and Scott. Senator Driscoll, Chairman. March 1, 2022, Mr. Presidential Committee Number 3, Revenue, to whom is referred House Bill 65 engrossed, County Tax Protest Filing Date. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Case, James, Pappas, and Schuler. Senator Case, Chairman. March 1, 2022, Mr. President, Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom is referred House Bill 78, Bid Rejection or Denial for Public Works Contracting. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Guru, Kinski, and Steinmetz. Excused, Senators Hicks and Perkins. Senator Kinski, Acting Chairman. February 28, 2022, Mr. Presidential Committee Number 4, Education, to whom is referred House Bill 29, Hathaway Scholarship Amendments. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Beitman, Ellis, Rothfuss, Salazar, and Scott. Senator Scott, Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. President, House Bill 29, Hathaway Scholarship Amendments, that was just read in from Committee 4, has what amounts to an appropriation in it. I ask it be re-referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations.
Okay, absent objection on that, we'll move it to Committee Number 2. Or something like that. Senator Driscoll. We're at that, Mr. Majority Floor Leader, we're at that order of business, consideration of bills on general file.
Mr. President, I move the Senate resolve itself in the Committee of the Whole.
For the motion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Senator Furphy, would you take us through Committee of the Whole?
Well, we got a lot of work to do this afternoon, so let's get after it. The Committee of the Whole, please come to order. First bill for our consideration is House Bill 9. If the clerk would please read the bill in.
House Bill 9, Economic Development Programs, Tribal Inclusion, sponsored by the Select Tribal Committee, an act relating to the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes. Was referred to Committee Number 9, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Beitman, Cooper, Rothfuss, and Wasserberger. Senator Anderson, Chairman.
Senator Anderson, what is your pleasure? Oh, yeah. My fault. There you go.
Mr. Chairman, I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report it, do so with the recommendation that House Bill 9 do pass. And to explain this great little bill, I would have you call on Senator Ellis, please.
Sorry.
Senator Ellis, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colleagues, this is intended to be a correctnical? Wow. This is a nice correctnical bill. Let's start over. Wyoming is a great state. And we have this thing called the Wyoming Business Council, and they administer 3 programs: the Wyoming Business Ready Community Program, the Community Facilities Program, and the Workforce Housing Infrastructure Program. I handed out a piece of paper in your boxes so you can see language that already exists. This bill would repeal this language, and I'll tell you why. You'll see that currently, language in our statute says that the Business Council may enter into cooperative agreements with the Eastern Shoshone Tribe and the Northern Arapaho Tribe. Unfortunately, I think despite the fact that the legislature intended the tribes to be eligible to receive funds through these 3 programs, there's been some concerns among those who interpret the law about what is a cooperative agreement. So under present interpretation, our tribes, even though we've expressed a desire for them to be included to be eligible for these programs, they are not. So what this bill seeks to do is to make it clear that our tribes are eligible. So if you go to page 3 of the bill, you're going to see this change. It would repeal this reference to a cooperative agreement and instead make it clear that the tribes, if they want to apply for these programs, that they would follow the same process that any city, town, or county would. So if you look at the language on page 3, this is dealing with the Business Ready Community Program. The new language would read that any city, town, county, or the Eastern Shoshone or Northern Arapaho Tribe or the cooperative tribal governing body may submit an application. So this change is also important because if you look at some of the language that currently exists, you'll see that we refer to the Shoshone Tribe and the Northern Arapaho Tribe. That's also been interpreted to mean that these programs, if they were available, would only be available if both tribes applied for them jointly. So what we've done in this bill is made it clear that each tribe on their own desire may apply, or if they wanted to apply together, that they could do so. You may recall, senators, that a few years ago, the tribes referred to themselves when they acted jointly as a joint intertribal council, or a joint council. They've dissolved that entity, but they've actually come together and they now refer to themselves as the Intertribal Council. And so the language you're going to see in this bill refers to a cooperative tribal governing body. That's intended to be a catch-all, so anytime the tribes are acting together. So that's the bill, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to walk you through it, but it just is seeking to make a very important clarifying change in the law so that our tribes will be eligible for these funds to participate as we had intended them to be. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Question?
Okay. Let's see, I gotta find my place here. There we are. All those in favor of Senator Anderson's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 9, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? House Bill 9 has passed Committee of the Whole. Next bill up for consideration is House Joint Resolution 1. I'll have clerk please read the bill.
House Joint Resolution 1, Supreme Court Justices and District Judges Retirement, sponsored by the Judiciary Committee. a joint resolution proposing to amend the Wyoming Constitution by amending the retirement age requirements for Wyoming Supreme Court justices and district court judges. Was referred to Committee Number 1, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes Senators Cooper, French, Cost, and Nethercott. No, Senator Kolb. Senator Nethercott, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Chairman Nethercott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the due pass recommendation of House Resolution 1, Supreme Court Justices and District Judges Retirement. To explain this good little resolution, I call on Senator Cost.
Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Being one of the older in the particular Judiciary Committee, I was asked to take on this good little bill. House Joint Resolution number 1 is talking about the age for judges to have to retire. Right now, it's currently 70. That number is not very far away for a couple of us, so it looks much younger than it used to be. We're amending the retirement age requirements for the Wyoming Supreme Court justices and district court judges. Electors of the state of Wyoming, please remember, this is a change in the Constitution, so from the joint resolution, it will, if we pass it out of here, it will go from there to on the general election. Electors of the state of Wyoming at the next general election for approval or rejection to become valid as a part of the Constitution if ratified by a majority of the electors at the election. If you turn to page 2, you will notice that what we've done is we've struck out the age of 70 and the information provided with the 70, and we've put in incumbent reaches the age of 75 years as the legislature may prescribe. And then down below, the legislature may also provide for benefits and for dependents of judges and justices and judges. And on the last page, page 3, you will see on line 3 that we said it used to be age of 70. This amendment increases the mandatory retirement age of Supreme Court justices and district court judges from age 70 to age 75. And that's really all it's about. Please remember that there are 23 counties with district judges in them. I hope that many of you will realize that anymore 75 is not that old. There is a provision through the courts that if there's a feeling that somebody's not adequately following necessary procedures and all, and they have a concern for their health, that they could be removed. So it's not like it's automatic. So 75 is a great place to go. I would ask all of you to consider approving that.
Questions? Senator Nethercott, or I mean Senator McCowan, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Why do we have an age in this? I'm going to tell you what, one of my best employees is 83 years old. She's sharper than a tack and in really good shape, physically capable. And I got another employee who's about 62, and I'm not sure he can find his way in from the parking lot some mornings. And I don't want to pick on him, but it seems to me we should not have an age in here. If they're good at 83, let's let them be a judge. If they're not good at 62, as I heard, there's provisions to guide him in from the parking lot. I just question why we even have an age in here, and I'll support the bill, but I'm probably going to try to find an amendment that just leans on if we have a problem with them, they need to retire. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the good senator next to me may or had an employee that was 62 years old after that comment. Anyway, Mr. Chairman, my concern is this. Number one, we're attempting to change our constitution based on what I believe I heard, that there are 2 justices that are getting close to 70, so let's move the age to 75. When they get close to 75, are we going to move the age to 80? And so on and so forth. So just a concern about the age. And also, Mr. Chairman, the age of 70 is there for a reason. If anybody can tell me why they chose 70 and why we would want to move that mile marker, I'd like to know that as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do know my way out of the parking lot, and I quit.
Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've seen this, this is an old friend to a lot of us have been here for a while. And I'll just, in response to not the previous speaker, but the speaker before that, I mean, the problem is and I'll just go back and first of all, I think that if there was an inclination or if there was an implication that this was being extended because there's 1 or 2 judges that this fits, I think that's false. In fact, I'll just give you an example. The Chief Justice last year reached 70 and aged out. I mean, and he was a great judge. But the other side of this coin, and reason it was 70, I think, and it was 70 for a long time, is granted, it may be, that 70 is not as, and in fact, now that I'm getting close to 70, it's a lot younger than I used to think it was. But nevertheless, the fact of the matter is that it only takes 1 judge to really mess this up. If people come and you've got 1 judge and they have lost their faculties or are beginning to struggle with some dementia or other degenerative condition, that's kind of the age that those things start in. Now, I will agree that 70 may be a bit young, and because I think we are living longer, and we are living healthier, but I think it's one of those things you do have to take seriously. It's not enough just to say that, hey, some people. I heard a person speak who's 93 the other day, and they're all there. But I know other people that we wouldn't want on the bench. And these folks, when you come back, when you stand for re-election, I think is it 6 years? I think it's a 6-year retention. So if they come in there, there's a lot of things that can happen. So ultimately, and the other side of this is the retirement for judges was specifically fashioned that they would serve somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to so many years. And we recognize that you want experienced people who in the prime of their earning capability will leave the bench and they'll go and they'll leave their practice and go to the bench and do this. And so in recognition, we have a very compressed, about a 15 to 17 year, you get most of your benefits out of retirement in the judicial retirement system. So we've geared it towards this. And so this may be appropriate, and I'm certainly willing to listen to this, but this is a matter you want to take seriously. It's not just a matter of age. It's because there's 5 Supreme Court justices. There's only 28, I think, or with the new numbers, right around 30 district court judges in the entire state. They have and about that same number of district court judges, or circuit court judges. They all have dramatic impacts on everybody's lives. And one judge that we extend too long because of this will have a dramatic impact on a lot of lives of people in whatever area that is. So just be careful with this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to be sympathetic to this change as well, but I would remind the chamber that the mandatory retirement age for a general or flag officer in the military is 64. And as the chairman of appropriations said, one mistake could very well harm a number of people. And so I also would give caution to this as well. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I know in the federal judiciary, there are some provisions where judges in retirement, can keep on hearing cases and whatnot. Do we have something similar here in Wyoming, or are they entirely out when they reach that mandatory retirement age?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the federal judiciary, there is no retirement age. So as those are presidential appointments to get on the federal bench. They do have something called senior status that the judge may elect to do, where they don't want to completely leave the bench, but want to lessen their caseload. Wyoming doesn't really have anything similar to that, except judges from retirement can be pulled out to sit on certain cases where there might be a conflict, or a judge might need vacation time or other type of bereavement leave, where a retired judge might come in and sit in their place for a period of time. But the system really doesn't allow for that, I would say, and particularly on the Supreme Court. Again, if there's a conflict of a justice, they might bring out a recently retired justice to come and sit, but there's no, continuation of duties in a permanent way that I'm aware of for senior type status that we see on the federal bench. So the answer to that is no. Concerning, it's a simple question, good senators. How many of you? Question? We're making laws, right? Evidently, we seem capable to do that as we approach 70 in the room. Judges are in a similar situation. I would say what we have experienced is kind of that hard stop at 70. We've lost a lot of good judges and justices as a result of that. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that the state would lose that talent and that skill and that commitment to, the judicial branch of the state of Wyoming simply because they reached the age of 70. And so there's been just what appears to be an inequity as it relates to that, and a loss to the state that is unexplainable as a result of age. Furthermore, I do think that this might open the door for further judicial applicants that may not be in a position to where they want to leave their practice, but might be interested in doing something differently. They've made their money, where you'd hear from most lawyers who are interested in becoming judges, that would be a pay cut for them. And so they're in a position to take a pay cut. They've potentially raised their families. Maybe they're going to go on the bench. Maybe they're going to run for office and come to the legislature, right? The similar age group there where there's a good timing in life maybe to make that change. And so this might open up that pool of applicants for somebody who might be 60, 65, interested in applying to be a judge, that certainly has the learned experience required for that, but wouldn't have this hard stop in 5 years, and really allow them to become an excellent judge on the bench with a little bit more time under their belt. So, it's not a hard question. I think that there's a major difference, and certainly you're all capable of hearing the distinction between a flag officer going to war and a judge going to preside over divorces and criminal cases in your local communities, or work on a term in the Supreme Court and hear oral arguments. So very unique differences associated with that and those requirements. Good senators, vote your conscience. I hate that. Yeah, question.
Mr. Chairman, I would have a different view than my colleague from Laramie County here about the nature of what judges do. Very similar to military officers, they hold life and death in their hands. They have that power. Very similar circumstances. But the question I have is, and maybe somebody can explain to me, 1890, this was ratified as part of our Constitution, so what hasn't worked in the last 132 years that we need to change this now? It's worked for 132 years with a retirement age of 70. Why hasn't it worked that demands that we change it now?
microphone, that I do so with favorable recommendation of House Joint Resolution 1. Please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no? No. Okay, there is division. I can't tell for sure. Will all of those in favor please stand? Okay, will the noes please stand? They were a very vocal group, yeah. Okay. House Joint
Must be a
Resolution
vociferous
1
group.
has passed Committee of the Whole. Oh, yes. Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, I've been in the legislature quite a few years. That bill seemed kind of close, cutting close to home. But one thing about being in the legislature, and I'm requesting privilege of the floor if I could, sir. And one thing about being in the legislature is you get to know some folks around here and spend a lot of time with them. And you know, the people on this floor and the people that support this floor and work in our committee rooms, they're some of my best friends my whole life. And up here in the gallery, we've got two remarkable people that work for this Wyoming Senate. So we've got Joanne Cornelius, who used to always sit on the floor and when I was in the chair, bring me water. And I always asked for whiskey and she never brought it. Never. I'm still mad about that. And Georgia George, who served as my committee secretary for quite a few years. They've both had kind of a tough year. They've lost very close members of their family, and our hearts go out to them. And would you please stand? It's so good to see you. And this is our Senate family. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, that last bill, could you please announce what the vote was?
It was close.
20 to 21 to 9. Yeah, so it was 21 in favor, 9 opposed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted, if I could have privilege of the floor, please. Thank you. Would like to introduce to the body some good friends of mine. I have Andy and Twyla Barnett from Niobrara County that I grew up with, if you guys would raise. But also back here, I have a constituent, Jerry Geis is down. So Jerry, would you stand and be recognized also? And Gwen, and his wife Gwen. Welcome to the Senate.
Welcome. All right, our next bill for consideration is House Bill 21. The reading clerk will please read the bill.
House Bill 21, repealing exemption for one-way pagers, sponsored by the Revenue Committee, an act relating to sales tax exemptions. It was referred to Committee Number 3, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Case, James, Pappas, and Schuler. Senator Case, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Case?
Mr. Chairman, I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a do pass recommendation on House Bill 22, Industrial Revenue Bonds Pilot Payments. And for an explanation of this bill, I'm looking around, which one? It's Senator Papist.
Mr. Chairman, we have up 21, and I believe you said 22.
Oh, sorry, you're absolutely correct. 2 in a row, Mr. Chairman. Sorry about that. I would withdraw that and ask that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a due pass recommendation on House Bill 21, a very exciting bill called Repealing the Exemption for One-Way Pagers. Which one's got that? I'll take it.
Yeah.
Nobody has one-way pagers anymore, Mr. Chairman. And you remember those things that used to be on your belt? You could have your Texas Instrument calculator on this side and your one-way pager on this side. Nobody has them. Let's repeal the exemption.
Senator Roth.
Thank you. I just want to know what repealing this exemption will do to the one-way pager market. Seems draconian. Thank you.
Any other comments? Calling for the question? All those in favor of Senator Case's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 21, please say aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
House Bill 21 has passed the Committee of the Whole. Next bill up for consideration now is House Bill 22. If the clerk could please read the bill.
House Bill 22 engrossed Industrial Revenue Bonds Pilot Payments, sponsored by the Revenue Committee, an act relating to industrial development projects, was referred to Committee Number 3, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes Senators Baldwin, James, Pappas, and Schuler. No, Senator Case. Senator Case, Chairman.
Senator Case, there is an amendment. Sorry, yep.
I'm sort of still just basking in the euphoria of having actually repealed an exemption in the Wyoming legislature. We haven't done that yet, but anyway, the next bill for our consideration is House Bill 22. It is Industrial Revenue Bonds Pilot Payments, and I would like to move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a due pass recommendation on this bill. For an explanation of the bill, I would ask that I yield to Senator Pappas. Senator Schuler. We're all one team.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I really did want to do 21 because it's the shortest bill on record, but I didn't get to. So anyway, I bring you House Bill 22, Industrial Revenue Bonds, Pilot Payments. Just a little bit about this bill. I didn't know much about these IRBs, and I learned a lot more. And so I think they're pretty amazing. If you have an IRB transaction, the loan is made by the bond purchaser, who's a lender, to the company, with the loan proceeds and loan repayments flowing through a government issuer. Sometimes they call them conduit bonds. And the government issuer takes in the title to the finance facility, and they enter to an agreement with the borrower. And the loan payments or lease rentals are used to repay the bonds with interest. And typically in a lease structure, the business is given the option to purchase the property at the end of the lease. And then the proceeds from the sale of these bonds are placed in escrow with the bank and used as directed by the business to pay eligible costs of constructing, acquiring, and installing the facilities. I don't think they've been used an awful lot, but basically these bonds can create jobs and they can stimulate the local economy. And quite often these IRB agreements require partial pilot payments, and those are payments that gradually increase over a 10-year property tax abatement period. So without going into the bill in too much detail, I will say there's some examples of projects right now in Wyoming that could utilize this program. I know there's a beef processing plant that could take advantage, a feed mill, an ethanol plant, a shoe company, there's manufacturing companies. There's a lot of companies that actually could take advantage of these and maybe haven't. So hopefully maybe with this bill, we might be able to get a little bit more movement with them. So with that, I would go ahead and have you read in the amendment.
Clerk, will you please read in amendment number 1 to House Bill 22?
House Bill 22, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to engrossed copy, page 2, line 1 before.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to House Bill 22 and ask for your consideration on it. And what we did on this page is we just, at the top of page 2, line 1, we put under and inserted before July 1st, 2032. This just basically helped those that might be thinking about jumping into this. It gives them, helps them to be exempt from the ad valorem taxes during the bond term or when they're, when they get started with it. But the governing body will still negotiate with them. And then down on line, page 2, line 18, it just brings that back again and just talks about projects that are initiated after July 1st, 2032 shall not be exempt under the subsection from ad valorem taxes. And then there's one little section in there that talks a little bit about subdivisions and other recipients. They could compensate the state at 50% of the share if they hadn't had that exemption authorized. So again, it's just, I think it's something that we don't take advantage of an awful lot. I think the thing I think that was probably most impressive to me in the testimony was that if governments choose to use these, they're not at risk. And I thought that was pretty important for our cities and counties that may decide to jump on board with industrial revenue bonds. So with that, happy to answer any questions on the amendment first. Any questions?
Senator Hutchins.
Just a quick question, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if I'm looking at the right amendment, but on my line 18, I don't have anything after the word provided. So I'm wondering, do you? On the actual bill, there's nothing after the word provided. And then on line 19 on page 2, I don't see the date there on my bill. Oh, I think I know what I'm doing. I'm not looking at the engrossed version. My error. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's the problem.
Any other question? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Schuler's motion to adopt the Standing Committee amendment to House Bill 22, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Amendment passes. We're back on the
Let
bill.
me get back to it. Gotcha.
Not so quick.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, just a question for maybe the chairman of revenue. How many of these are currently out there? Do we know what that number is that we're currently, where we have these bonding out there on these?
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, the testimony that we received is that this is not used very much at all because without the tax advantage, there's no real reason for companies to take advantage of this. So what this bill does is give them a tax advantage with respect to property taxes. And that's why it would expect it to be used a lot more in the future. I think that we did hear that there was a couple of them out there, but not very much in a decade. If any other committee member wants to weigh in, thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one other question for the Chairman of Revenue, and that is, when we get in there and when we require, I think I get, so when we go into the exemption statute, we were just talking about this in the context of a bill we talked about a little bit earlier, but in the context of the exemption statute, I'm just wondering how that, I mean, you're threading that needle with whether things can be exempt, and we've talked about this a number of times in a number of the contexts about exempt, where if it's a nonprofit or municipality, those are exempt under the Constitution. And this one, is there? It seems like we're kind of trying to thread the half needle in this, and I'm just wondering, they did any analysis about whether things can be partially exempt that are supposed to be exempt in the first place, or vice versa?
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, so I voted no against the bill in committee. I was the only no vote. It's not really fair for me to try to answer, to defend the bill. So I yield to anybody on the committee. But this would be a powerful tool. It'd be a powerful tool. You got to think about it. But it allows the local government to enter into an agreement on how property taxes can be relieved for a period of time. And, you know, and it is modeled after what other states do. We heard testimony about the state of New Mexico. This is a big economic development tool for them. And so, but as I said, I was on the other side of the final vote. So I yield.
Any other questions? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, question in this one, if we pass this one, the way our education finance system works with its equalizations and where we're picking up the difference, does this mean that if some local outfit decides to defer the property taxes, all of the rest of the state pays for a good part of that?
Senator Case.
Boy, I'm in a really weird position here, you know? But if you go to page 2, and it lines, the first paragraph there, it says projects initiated under this section are exempt from ad valorem taxes during the bond term, but the governing body shall negotiate with the proposed lessee an annual fee in lieu of taxes, which shall, and the word fully is stricken, and it says shall compensate the state, the political subdivisions, and other recipients of ad valorem taxes for 50% of the share each would have received had the exemption not been authorized. There's your answer.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, I just need a little more explanation because this is not an area that I'm familiar with, but I'm assuming it would be the project proponent that would determine the length of the bonds that they wanted issued underneath this. And so is that a negotiated item, or does the industrial development or the wants to use these come in and say, I want a 20-year, 30-year, 40-year bond? So what's the term of those bonds, and how is that developed? And then just a little bit of explanation as to why it's 50% and where that number come from, and why that would be important. And I understand if you could defer your local property taxes by 50%, that may be something you want to do, but just a little discussion on where that number come from, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm sorry if I missed it, the senator from Fremont County, but maybe just a broad level overview of how this bill came to be a joint revenue committee bill with the level of support it evidently has, sensing it's going to die today. And what are your reasons not to support it? Why were you a no vote, more importantly? And number one committee, don't ever do this.
Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me just trying to understand this a little bit more. So just looking at the Article 15, Section 12, which is exemptions from taxation. And so the property of the United States, counties, cities, towns, school districts, and municipal corporations, when used primarily for governmental purpose, and then some other things. And then there's this catch-all at the end, and such other property as the legislature may, by general law, provide. And so you've got to have a general law that provides for some kind of exemption for taxation. And so, again, you come back to this whole issue on taxation, and our property tax is pretty clear. It's got to be ratably, it has to be uniformly assessed, and it's got to be uniformly taxed. We can provide for exemptions. And so I'm just trying to figure out where this fits in and how this works, because I'm struggling a little bit because of a conversation we had just a little bit a day or two ago on a certain, and I know we're not supposed to reference other bills, we had the same conversation, and we thought that a Senate joint resolution was necessary because of that exemption. And so this one, property is exempt. It seems to me its property is allowed to be exempt or not exempt. And so you have these other partial exemptions. And I just need some help understanding how we get to this point where I can understand how it can be fully exempt and I can understand how it can be fully taxable. I'm not sure how we thread the needle where it is and it isn't at the same time.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just the conversation I recall when we heard the information in our joint committee, we were trying to find, a number of incentives and things to try and get, to try and look at our tax structure and what we're doing now. Of course, we were looking at the possibility of our extractive industries and where they were, not knowing what was going to happen in the future. So this was mainly brought to us as kind of a, and as the good senator who was the chairman of the committee mentioned, in another state, they use these a lot and they have really good luck with them. And I think it kind of, in other states, I think they calculate the percentage of property tax abatement based on a variety of criteria. They take a look at how many jobs are going to be created and what the amount of new capital investment is, a lot of different things that they look at before they decide to go with these IRBs. So I think, you could set it up, the way you want it. But again, it was just a state that we heard from that is having really, really, really good luck with IRBs. It was just another tool in the toolbox if it was something we wanted to use. If there may be some government entities that wouldn't want to take advantage of this, but, if they have projects in their communities that they see could use them, and I mentioned some of those, it may be something they might want to look into. So it's just another, like I said, another tool in the toolbox. I hope that answers your question.
Senator Bourne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to expand upon that a little bit, since the Ag Committee did also look at industrial revenue bonds in a slightly different light, this is a tool that is just not used hardly at all. I think the only example from this procedure that is currently in the statute was actually one from Commerce County I think it's for a gas plant that, they got approval from your local county commissioners, but at the end of the day, you have to find somebody in the private sector actually finance the project, and they couldn't find the financing. And so I think that has to do with the fact that there is very little advantage to pursuing these bonds if you're looking at from the lens of the local property taxes. And there's other ways you can get exempt from federal taxes, for example. But for the purposes of this bill, it's just, we can see why this is underutilized because there's no advantage. So if we're worried about the effect on our, say, statewide education funding, to me, that speaks to the drawbacks and I'll leave it at that, the drawbacks of our statewide education funding model and the absurdity of it. So let's fix that problem if that's the problem. I think this is a good bill that will help move these projects along, give our local leaders an additional tool in the toolbox, as my colleague in front of me said. So I think this seems like a good bill based off of the testimony that we received in committee number 5. In fact, I think we may have had the exact same white paper, more or less, from staff going over these bonds. So on for the bill, I think that it serves a purpose, and we can just give more local control to folks who want to do economic development.
Senator Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question about page 2, line 5, when you struck fully. And for, I guess, a little bit of information for the body, the area in the Sweetwater with the big, beautiful power-producing coal plant, in fact, has these bonds. Because in my past life, commission, we approved these bonds. So they are used. But I just wonder why we had to strike fully, and I'd like to hear an explanation and to say they have been used. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Perkins.
Thank you. And actually, I get the answer to my question from the good senator from the Southwest. And I get it now, because what it is the property is fully exempt from taxation. And then in this bill allows for by contract, relies for a payment in lieu of taxes. So it's really not a taxation, it's a matter of contract. And so you're able to have exempt property, and by contract, then they agree to make this payment that at least up to 50% of the value of the taxes recompenses the county for what it does. So I do appreciate that, and I did get my question answered, and although she didn't know she was answering it, it struck a chord, and I get it now. So on and for the bill.
Okay, question's been called. All of those in favor of Senator Case's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, that it do so with favorable recommendation of House Bill 22. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? No. Yeah, we think it passes. So House Bill 22 has passed Committee of the Whole. President Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Privilege of the floor, please. Okay. Yep. I'm going to go forward. So here we are. Folks, I'd like you to...
I'm sorry, yes, please proceed.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Folks, I'd like to introduce you to a group of people that really make it happen across the state of Wyoming. And maybe I should declare conflict before I do, but nonetheless, I'm going to move forward here. Folks, we've got the members of the 11 rural electric co-ops in the chambers today all the way around us. Let me just tell you who we have up there first, then we'll acknowledge them. We got Bighorn Rural Electric Association, based in Wyoming, Bridger Valley Electric Association, Mountain View, Bridger Valley, Carbon Power and Light, Saratoga, Garland Light and Power, Powell.
Where are they?
Well, just hang on, and you'll see them when they stand up. Garland's Light and Power, Powell, High Plain Power, Riverton, High West Energy, Pine Bluffs, Lower Valley Energy, Afton, conflict, Niobrara Electric Association, Lusk, Powder River Energy, Sundance, Wheatland, REA, Wheatland, and Y Rural Elect in Lingle. Would you stand up and welcome them to the Senate? Appreciate you joining us today, folks. You folks put a lot of work into what you do for keeping the power on at a decent price across the state of Wyoming. Thanks for coming and joining us today.
Mr. Chairman, privilege of the floor.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I would have to say that is one of the most electrifying groups that I've ever seen in the Wyoming Senate.
Senator Cox.
Mr. Chairman, privilege of the floor.
Please proceed.
We have the Park County Director of Weed and Pest, Josh Shorb, up there, and we ought to have him stand up and recognize him for the good work he does for Park County in the area.
Yeah. Okay, the next bill for our consideration is House Bill 30. If the clerk could please read the bill.
House Bill 30, School Finance, Increasing Cash Reserves, sponsored by the Education Committee, an act relating to school finance. Was referred to Committee Number 4, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Beitman, Ellis, Rothfuss, Salazar, and Scott. Senator Scott, Chairman.
Senator Scott, you have heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, I move when the Committee of the Whole rise and report it do so with the recommendation that House Bill 30 do pass. Mr. Chairman, what this bill does is it allows the school districts to increase their cash reserves they carry over from one year to the next for a limited period. Mr. Chairman, this originated in the recalibration attempt last year. It was a part of it that was not controversial. It was a reaction to the federal stimulus money that was, we discovered, they passed the bill actually during the session last year. And it's an attempt to make it easier for the districts to spend that money sensibly and to save a bit when it's appropriate. You can see the effective language on the bill starting on page 3 at line 17. What it does is increases the reserves that they can carry over from the current 15% to 30%. That will give them a lot more flexibility in dealing with this money, and I hope it will prevent some instances where otherwise money might get spent in haste so they could get it spent, because what'll happen now is we'll spend the federal money, as I understand it, on the operations in accordance with the federal requirements, and then carry over the saved general fund money. That will provide us a little extra cushion in the future and give the districts more time, because if you have to spend federal money in a hurry, you're likely to waste some of it, just in the nature of things. So it seems to us to be a very sensible provision. It will start right away this fiscal year, and the money was delayed somewhat in getting to the districts because it was not accepted until the feds could specify more clearly than they had what it was to be for, what the consequences were if it got misspent. And I think the executive branch very wise to delay that acceptance until they had those answers from the feds. So the money didn't come in till this fiscal year. With the immediate effective date, this applies to this fiscal year, because what counts is what they do at the end of the fiscal year. And it will expire on June 30 of 2026. You can see that on page 4. Mr. Chairman, that's the bill. I'd be happy to answer any questions. We do think it will help the school finance.
Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one question, and it's just kind of a forethought to it. Should we stair step that so that by 26 they're back down to 15%, so that they don't end up trying to spend a large amount on the remainder of the 26 year? I'm just wondering if we started out with the 30% and then went down to 25 and then 20 and then 15, if that would get them back to where they were without all of a sudden having a big chunk that they were caught with. Just a question.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I would say it's not clear what we ought to do right in 2026. It'll depend on the situation at the time and our experience with it, whether we ought to ratchet it with the bill. It goes back to the 15%. That still allows them a year to get down from the June 30, 2026, clear to the end of the next fiscal year. So there is that possibility. If it proves to work very well, then I think we can leave it where it is. We can modify it. That'll be something we'll need to review in the year or so before it expires. At this point, we really don't know what kind of circumstance we're going to face. So I think you've put your finger on what may be a problem for a future legislature, or may not be, and we don't know enough at this point to be intelligent on that subject. So yes, we may want to do that, but let's wait till closer to the time so we know better what we're up against. This much of a big influx of money we're not sure about. And it may be in our interest to continue it, it may not be. So I think we need to keep that in the back of our mind, like any sunset date. As it approaches, you need to take a look at it and see, is it sensible or should you modify something? Mr. Chairman, I hope that's satisfactory.
Senator Hicks and then Senator Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My worry would be if we wait watching it, then all of a sudden we might have a lot at the very end. If we set it up the other way, it might stair step it down so that we don't have to worry about that. I just would hate to have a large sum of money at the end that they've got to get rid of. I'm not doubting their ability to spend the money and all, but I thought maybe if we could do a stair step, it might just help to make sure that they're back to 15.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I wouldn't have tremendous opposition if you wanted to do that as an amendment. But with or without that, I think in whoever's here in 2025, before that session, we ought to take a look at it and see if it needs to be changed then. And we can look again in the next year while they're doing the runoff, actually look at as late as the 2027 general session to see what kind of circumstance we're in and do we need to modify things. So we can put one in, but Mr. Chairman, I suspect we may change it as we approach the date and know better what we're up against.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a reminder, this is a committee bill. We took a lot of testimony on it, and this is where we landed. So I just wanted to remind the body that the school districts have weighed in, and this was language that we all seem to agree on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cole.
Mr. Chairman, I stand in favor of this bill. I find it, I don't know, a funny conversation that now we're questioning local control. So I'd like to give the local people all the control. I think I can trust them, and I stand with them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, a question for the Education Committee. Was there any discussion about, this is the 30% increase on the state foundation program account, but we know that there's a significant number of districts out there that have pre-97 reserves also. And so was there any calculation amongst the school districts to look at how much this would actually increase their reserves? Because I know sitting through the school school recalibration program, that we know that there's some districts that have what we call the pre-1997, which are local government derived funds prior to the state coming in and taking over that have a significant amount of money in those reserves. So did the Education Committee look that if we raise this to 30%, how much is that in addition to their 97 reserves that they're still carrying on the balance? Just a question is, was there any discussion at all on the Education Committee associated with those reserves also?
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I do not recall any discussion during the interim, and there wasn't in the Senate Education Committee. And the reason is that what this is designed for is dealing with the federal stimulus, and that doesn't affect the pre-97 reserves. They are what they are, and what we needed to do was possible to deal sensibly with the federal stimulus money that was coming in. So the level of the pre-97 reserves does not affect the figure we ought to have in here.
Any other questions? Ready for vote? Okay, all those in favor of Senator Scott's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 30, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. House Bill 30 has passed the Committee of the Whole. Next bill up for consideration is House Bill 37. If the clerk would please read the bill.
House Bill 37 engrossed. Juvenile Justice Data Reporting, sponsored by the Judiciary Committee, an act relating to criminal history records, was referred to Committee Number 1, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes Senators Cooper, French, Kolb, Cost, and Nethercott. Senator Nethercott, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Chairman Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the due pass recommendation of House Bill 37 engrossed, juvenile justice data reporting. To explain this good little bill, I call on Senator Kolb.
Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have here in front of us a bill with a long history, and I'd like to explain it. So this involves criminal history records, and it's the transferring of that responsibility to the Juvenile Justice Information System to the Department of Family Services, requiring the Department of Family Services to standardize the collection of juvenile justice information, amending requirements of the juvenile justice information, amending reporting requirements, authorizing a position, providing appropriations and requiring a report, most importantly, and of course an effective date. I'd like to explain, I guess, the need for this and how it came to be. During the interim work, there was a lot of information that was trying to be gathered, and it became apparent that there wasn't a good collection point and therefore a lack of information to make any decisions about juvenile justice in a direction of which way to go with that program. So because of that lack of information, this bill, in my opinion, becomes a cornerstone of moving forward with any juvenile justice decisions. And I'll stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Questions? Senator Rollins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like a little more discussion and background on how the system works and whether anything is changing with the system. I do understand a shift in responsibility, but I mean sort of more on the what data is being collected, how is it being retained, when is it being destroyed, what standards are it being, what standards are being used to administer it. And I'm really just kind of contemplating it from a data security standpoint. If nothing's changing, that would be good to know. But if things are changing, I'd appreciate that.
Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that really nothing has changed with the collection. It's more of the dissemination of the information that has not been collected. So I guess it's kind of unbelievable, or maybe it's not, that we have statutes that there were not non-compliance. So we were not getting the information. So the information people that watch over this has changed. It's the same information that was out there. The procedures are the same, depending on the type of information we're talking about. If it's a juvenile that's reached the age of adulthood, that information is supposed to be destroyed, and there's a whole procedure for doing that. But really, in a summary, we're just trying to bring the information to another area that the belief is there will be compliance, and that information will be able to be disseminated, destroyed, or held in with the same security that currently exists, as outlined in the bill. I can go in more detail if it's requested, but I hope that sheds some light on the background of this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Call for the question. All those in favor of Senator Nethercott's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 37, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. House Bill 37 has passed Committee of the Whole. The next House Bill is 70. Would the clerk please read the bill?
House Bill 70, Digital Identity Protection, sponsored by the Blockchain Committee, an act relating to digital identity, was referred to Committee Number 9, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Beitman, Cooper, Rothfuss, and Wasserberger. Senator Anderson, Chairman.
Senator Chairman, or Anderson, you've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that House Bill 70 do pass. And to explain this great little bill is Senator Rothfuss.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, House Bill 70, Digital Identity Protection, is from the Blockchain Select Committee, and it's just a couple of updates of existing statute related to digital identity. We passed legislation last year to create the concept of digital identity, which you can think of as all of your social media, but a lot more, basically the digital representation of you that's within your control. And there were two places in statute that we wanted to tie into existing law. One of those was with regard to intellectual property type concepts on the civil side. You see that on page 1 going on to page 2, where there's a new impersonation of digital identity and the remedies thereof, which indicates that if you're impersonating a digital identity with regard to intellectual property style infringements, civil infringements, that you have remedy there and recourse. And then an amendment on page 2 going into page 3, which gets into the spoofing statute and the electronic impersonation statute that we passed 7-ish years ago whenever we worked on that. And all this does is, in existing statute, add the language that you see on line 5 or that person's personal or organizational digital identity so that the spoofing law that we previously passed would be relevant to personal or organizational digital identities. Mr. Chairman, that's it. So no new statute, no new laws, just adding our digital identity legislation from last year into existing statute where it's relevant to protect your digital identity. Happy to answer any questions.
Question? Seeing none, are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Anderson's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 70, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. House Bill 70 has passed Committee of the Whole. Next bill up is House Bill 86. If we could have the clerk please read the bill.
House Bill 86, Genetic Data Privacy Amendments, sponsored by the Blockchain Committee, an act relating to genetic data privacy. It was referred to Committee Number 1, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Cooper, French, Kolb, Cost, and Nethercott. Senator Nethercott, Chair.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Chairman Anderson? Oh, Chairman Nethercott.
Yeah, she's standing.
Oh, I gotta get you.
Yeah.
There we go, sorry.
Thank you. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the due pass recommendation of House Bill 86, Genetic Data Privacy Amendments. To explain this good bill, I'll call on Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, House Bill 86, Genetic Data Privacy Amendments, is another piece of legislation from the Blockchain, Financial Technology, and Digital Innovation Technology Select Committee. And Senate, I'll remind you that about, I guess it was 2018, we passed the first Genetic Information Privacy Act in the state of Wyoming. It was a good bill, but certainly not complete. And what it was the most advanced in the country, the most rigorous protection in the country, but it certainly had some loopholes and concerns and considerations. that have been improved upon since that time by some other states. So what we did during this last interim was look to best practices in a few areas of genetic data privacy and incorporated those into our existing statute. So before we walk through it, I'll clarify, we didn't roll anything back on protections or repeal anything that were previously protections in place, nor allowances in place. So think what law enforcement could do, paternity testing, the things that were currently enabled in statute. And so you won't see those in this bill because they're already codified in statute. This legislation is more specifically targeting some updated definitions which are considered best practice, as well as something that we now see a lot of, which is direct-to-consumer genetic testing, where everyone here can probably think of a couple of companies that provide services for direct-to-consumer testing, where you'll spit into a tube, you'll send that off, they sequence your data, they provide you with information, perhaps about your genealogy, or perhaps about whether you have any specific genetically related diseases or disorders or anything along those lines. And a lot of progress has been made in providing protection specific to the handling of that data, and that is, for the most part, what this is about, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to try and walk through it quickly because it really does get to the heart of implementing that, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to dig in more deeply, just sensitive to the time. Mr. Chairman, on page 1 onto 2 is the only part of the statute that's created that's new, so that's why it's up front. But it simply says that no provision of this act shall be waived by a consumer of these direct-to-consumer testing. In other words, as you're scrolling through the ridiculously long and complicated details of various online forms, you're not going to be allowed to waive the rights that are here, which is actually considered to be a best practice in other states as well, and other states have adopted that, just to provide that protection and limitation on waiver. And then the B provision that you see here, the new paragraph, indicates that if this is already covered by statutes such as HIPAA with regard to protected health information, then that federal law is going to preempt as it's supposed to. So we wanted to provide that clarification, Mr. Chairman. Moving on, Mr. Chairman, to page 3. We see new definitions. These are updated definitions that, again, have been drafted to be more technically accurate and appropriate, and they are better definitions than what we previously had, going into some key concepts such as genetic testing and genetic data. Continuing on to page 4, extensions of those definitions and conforming amendments for the updated updated definitions. On to page 5, additional definitions. Once again, you'll see the definition, for example, of consumer, which means a natural person who is a resident of the state of Wyoming. This gets into the direct-to-consumer product marketing, et cetera, and concepts about de-identified data. On to page 6, specifically what that direct-to-consumer genetic testing company is defined as. And an important concept is Romanet 11, express consent. This express consent is a pretty rigorous express consent. You can see that it means a consumer's affirmative response to a clear, meaningful, and prominent notice regarding the collection, use, or disclosure of the consumer's genetic data for a specific purpose. That does not mean agreeing to generalized end-user license agreements or anything along those lines. It's very specific and clear, which is, I think, a strong benefit for the people of Wyoming. Page 6 and on to page 7, conforming amendments for the new definitions. On to page 8. Some requirements about safeguarding of information, where to safeguard the privacy, confidentiality, security, and integrity of a consumer's genetic data, a direct-to-consumer genetic testing company shall, and then this lays out required provisions, such as providing clear and complete information, which would include a high-level privacy policy, a prominent publicly available privacy notice, requirement that they obtain a consumer's consent for the collection, use, or disclosure of the consumer's genetic data, including at a minimum, and some key provisions here that are each individually required: initial express consent that describes the use of the data, separate express consent for transferring or disclosing it, separate express consent for the retention of any biological sample, and informed consent in compliance with federal policy if you're going to incorporate or engage in any federal research, which requires separate provisions and is actually largely preempted by federal law. The E paragraph on page 10, separate express consent for marketing to a consumer for any of these products. Romanet 3 requires valid legal process for disclosing genetic data to law enforcement. This is the only place that it's specifically mentioned, but it's a key provision that full due process is required for disclosure to law enforcement. Requirement for security, comprehensive security, and then a process, which is the last key provision onto 11, a process such that consumers can access their genetic data, delete it if desired, or request and obtain the destruction of the consumer's biological sample if desired. And then the final provision here that we see that's before conforming amendments is a D provision, which goes beyond federal statute, which indicates that notwithstanding any other provision in this section, a direct-to-consumer genetic testing company shall not disclose a consumer's genetic data to any entity offering health insurance, life insurance, or long-term care insurance. Conforming amendments on 12, and then 13 provides a provision for a cure if there is a violation, and then provides a private right of action, as well as on behalf of the Attorney General for the state. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the explainer of the bill, what I'd like to know is, when you said this has to do with the, kind of like the DNA testing that you do, you spit in the tube and you send it off, is this gonna be like the contract you see kind of on your phone or online when you want to do something, you have this long Privacy Act notification, you just scroll through it to get down to the bottom to say, I accept this, because there's a lot of detail in there. So I'm wondering, what are some of the problems that kind of, that have happened with this testing that brought this bill about? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So essentially, when you spit in the tube and mail it off to a different state or wherever it might be, what then happens with your DNA? Because that saliva in the tube is in fact your biological information that contains the entire mapping of your entire identity. So, in light of the significance of that saliva, what type of consent should be required with the company of whom you are contracting with to learn your origins or to learn whatever diseases you might be susceptible to? And so in light of the significance of that saliva, these protections have been put in place for Wyoming consumers, that they can't just click the box. It has to be an express consent, written consent. And then that sample must be destroyed, that they can't use it for other purposes, that they can't keep it in a database, which may or may not have already occurred to many of you. And so those protections are in place, and those are the reasons why. Because I don't think that the consumers maybe have a full appreciation of how that DNA and that information associated with it may be utilized by other governments, by other private corporations, however that information may be used.
Any other questions?
Now you're all scared.
Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Nethercott's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with favorable recommendation of House Bill 86, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. House Bill 86 is passed, Committee of the Whole. Next bill for consideration is House Bill 59. If the clerk would please read the bill.
House Bill 59, Workers' Compensation COVID-19, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee, an act relating to workers' compensation. was referred to Committee Number 2, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Guru, Hicks, Kinsky, Perkins, and Steinmetz. Senator Perkins, Chair.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee whole rise and report to do so with a due pass recommendation on House Bill 59, workers' compensation, COVID-19. Mr. Chairman, just a brief explanation of the bill. The bill does two things. First of all, it makes clear that when we came back and we extended COVID and created a presumption that COVID that happened, particularly back in the early stages of the pandemic, because we had so many people who were out who were essential employees. And so we created, for a brief period of time, a presumption that COVID was a work-related injury. And so the time for that, to continue that, has passed, and that's ended. But we do have to now to deal with the injuries and the claims that are coming in on COVID-based claims. So what this does is, if you'll note, the first part of it is it makes sure that none of the charges for COVID are chargeable against the employer's experience rating. We believe that was an intent expressed during the special session a couple of years ago at the beginning of COVID. And so this makes sure that that's not chargeable against the employer. And the other thing it does is it creates a deadline by which claims for COVID have to be filed. So the compensable injuries where this COVID presumption existed for workers' compensation purposes lasted from January 21st to 2020 and ended March 31st of 2022, which is at the end of this month. And then it also limits the time for which they can file a claim to basically a year from now, or a year from the end of this month. And so that will end that period. Just so you have some idea of the economic impact of what this means is, there's been between $9 to $12 million paid out with respect to COVID claims that arose under this presumption. About over 2,000 cases, like 2,300 cases. There's been about a dozen or so, if I remember the testimony right, of actually deaths arising from COVID. Those have a payout depending upon what the person did and what the family and who the survivors are. Those have payout potentially up to $550,000. So it's a significant amount. So this we're on to make sure that we're living up to the promises that we made in the special session, that during the height of the pandemic, that those essential workers were covered. They have been covered. That coverage period ends, and then it gives them another year to file claims just in case things show up later. And so anyway, we ask you to support us with this amendment and make sure that that limited time that we extend that is over, and also make sure that we've got this time to allow people to get their claims in case something crops up in the next year that they still can file. And that's substantially longer than you would have under normal instances. You normally would have 15 days or so, very tight coverage. But so we're just trying to make sure that we uphold the promises we made during the special session. So stand for questions and urge your aye vote. Thank you.
Senator Cole. No, it's Senator McCowan that stood up, sorry.
McEwen, but that's okay. Thank you, Mr.
McEwen.
Chairman. This experience rating thing here, it's near and dear to my heart. And anybody else who probably runs a business understands this. And as I read this bill, I have to ask the question. So after March 31st, if somebody gets COVID, my experience rating's now in danger? It's not really, in my mind, a workplace injury. There's nothing I can do about it. Well, what if they don't get COVID at the store? So I guess I'm asking, do I understand this exemption properly, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, sure. Go ahead.
Senator Kinsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, the purpose of the bill is to keep it from hitting your experience rating.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, first on and for the bill. I think it's a good bill. My question is, what is the total cost of this all in estimated to be when we're all said and done with this thing?
Senator Grove.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The short answer is we don't know. Up to now, we know that it's cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $9 million for the claims that are on the books so far. That includes 22 deaths, an average payout per death of $500,000, and the rest is ongoing. Now, be reminded that our workers' comp fund has over $2 billion on deposit. And so our actuarial folks are saying that right now it is not a significant bill, but we do not know. We do not know what the total cost will be. And so your Appropriations Committee is asking at each time when we meet with these folks from workers' comp that they keep us apprised of what the costs are, and we'll be able to let you know. But as was stated, this bill just helps with the experience rating, but that's the answer specific to your question. Thank you.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Another thing, when this bill came to the Appropriations Committee in the beginning, there was a presumption of liability that they did get COVID on the job. And so that was the part we removed out of this bill, and then we worked with the date as well. So just wanted the body to know that has been removed from statute. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Perkins.
Thank you. I just want to just finish up on one point. So the way that communicable diseases work on workers' comp is you have to show that you are more likely and that you likely caught it at work as opposed to some other exposure. And so it's very difficult to win a workers' compensation claim for a communicable disease in workers' comp. It just is, and it should be. And so if just taking you back during the time when we passed this bill, people were across the nation, Wyoming less so, but people across the nation were in lockdown. What you had is a bunch of people who had to go out, and you had essential services, and those essential service workers were out there doing what they had to do to keep food on your table and keep gasoline at the gas stations and whatever else they were doing. And so we made that exception during that period. Obviously, that's changed now where the pandemic has developed, and so it's really, I think it's highly appropriate that we move this back to where now is a communicable disease that you would have to demonstrate particular risk that you caught it at work as opposed to some other place. And so it's very appropriate we do this now, and it makes a lot of sense, and it will protect your experience rating if you're worried about that. So, thank you.
Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Perkins' motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with the favorable recommendation of House Bill 59, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. House Bill 59 is passed Committee of the Whole. Next bill up for consideration is House Bill 46. If we could have the clerk please read the bills.
House Bill 46, Partnership Challenge Loan Program Amendments, sponsored by the Minerals Committee, an act relating to the Wyoming Economic Development Act, was referred to Committee Number 9, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Beitman, Cooper, Rothfuss, and Wasserberger. Senator Anderson, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, I move when the Committee of the Whole raises the report, they do so with the recommendation that House Bill 46 do pass. And to explain this great little bill, Senator Wasserberger. Thank you.
Senator Wasserberger.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the Challenge Loan Program, and it was created in 1998 when the Wyoming Business Council was created. So far, the WBC has loaned about $36.5 million since 1998, and they have had 267 loans. The total amounts combining banks and WBC is $74.1 million, and the total interest earned in this time is $5.675 million. They have had 16 loans that were charged off for a net gain of $4.6 million. Loan limits have not changed since 1998, and that's what this bill does, is increase the dollar amount for loans. House Bill 46 will combine the existing bridge loan and guaranteed loan participation program and rename it the 50/50 financing program. This language can be found on page 2, lines 11 through 15. The maximum amount of participation from the WBC will be the lesser of 50% of cost, or $2.5 million. This language can be found on page 2, lines 19 and 20. On page 3, lines 1 through 10, there's language that extends the challenge loan, that ends the challenge loan program. This is a loan to a local economic development organization. This will change from a cash matching 50/50 loan program to an 80/20 split, where the economic development would need 20% down and the WDC would be lending the remaining 80%. The reason for this is very few economic development organizations have the liquidity to pay 50% of the cost of the spec building or business park or what other infrastructure they're trying to build. This will require the EDOs to have skin in the game, but not so much that it's not unattainable. On page 3, lines 7 through 10, the bill eliminates the program. The Interim Minerals Committee felt this program has never been used, and this niche is filled by loan guarantees from the SBA and the USDA banks and financial institutions around the state. So we combined the bridge loan and the guaranteed loan participation program together and renamed it the 50/50 financing program. And we set the date of the end of the guaranteed loan program at July 1, 2022, where throughout the bill you will find conforming language. On page 7, line 10 and 12, creates the contract financing program. This program will allow small manufacturers around the state to purchase raw materials to complete a contract. The maximum loan amount is $200,000. The maximum total loans in the portfolio of this type is $1 million. On page 9, lines 6 through 23, the bill specifies the requirements for the contract financing program. And Mr. Chairman, I'm just going to walk through the bill very quickly. On page 2, lines 11 through 23, you find the 50/50 financing program, and then we increase the amount for loans from $1 million to $2.5 million. On page 3, we end the guaranteed loan program at lines 7 through 10, and conforming language at 11 or 14, lines 14 through 16. On page 3, line 18 through 21, we have the contract financing means a provision of financing for a business to gain liquidity, and in which the business assigns the proceeds of a valid contract as collateral for financing. On page 4, we have the secession financing for the bridge from the guaranteed loan to the 50/50 financing program, and that's at lines 1 through 5. On page 4, lines 10 through 21 is existing language, and also all the way over to page 5. And then finally at page 5, lines 11 through 12, we change the CDO commits not less than 20%. Continuing on, we get to the biggest part of the bill we change. On page 6, lines 1 through 2, we increase the amount from $500,000 to $1 million. And then for the 50/50 program, we increase from $1 million to $2.5 million. Continuing on, we get to page 7, where at lines 10 through 12, we do the contract financing not to exceed $200,000. Lines 14 through 16, succession financing at $500,000. And then on lines 18 through 23, the 50/50 program replaces the bridge program. Continuing on page 8, conforming language, which ends the guaranteed loan program. And then on page 9, we have the requirements for contract financing loan at lines 6 through 23, and continuing over to page 10, lines 1 through 7. And then at page 10, lines 9 through 23, business that applies for a loan and the requirements to do that. And then finally, that carries over to page 11, the lines 11 through 10. And then finally, we get to page 12, where at line 15, section 3, we require a report to the Joint Minerals Interim Committee within 15 days of ending the guaranteed loan program. And Mr. Chairman, I believe that's the bill. And I just want to say, Mr. Chairman, if there's any questions, the outstanding chairman of Minerals will answer them.
Questions?
Question?
Question, okay. Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Anderson's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 46, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. Bill passes. House Bill 46 is passed Committee of the Whole. Next bill up for consideration is House Bill 45. If we could have the clerk please read the bill.
House Bill 45, Mine Reclamation Bonding Voluntary Assigned Trust, sponsored by the Minerals Committee, an act relating to environmental quality. It was referred to Committee Number 9, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes Senators Anderson, Beitman, Cooper, Rothfuss, and Wasserberger. Senator Anderson, Chair.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Chairman Anderson. Yeah, I gotta get you back on here. There we go, sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that House Bill 45 do pass. And to explain this great little bill and not return it to me is Senator Rothfuss.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, House Bill 45, Mine Reclamation Bonding, Voluntary Assigned Trusts. I was looking for the standing committee amendment. I believe there is one. I'll get to that when I get to it, but if anyone could hand me a paper copy, that would be handy. Mr. Chairman, this is an excellent bill that came from the Joint Minerals Business and Economic Development Interim Committee that would provide the state additional surety for bonding requirements that are already in place for our minerals industry, whether that's coal, oil, and gas, or any of our other mining materials, bentonite, trona, or otherwise, where they typically have surety instruments that involve external bonding, and then we've seen historically that there can be problems with bonding in situations of financial distress where we don't end up with all of the bonds actually being realized if a bankruptcy court ends up getting involved. So the surety is not as sound as we would like, and we struggle with that. What this provides is a new program whereby a cash trust or a cash surety can be held by the state of Wyoming on behalf of the entity, where they basically pay in to replace that bond instrument, and then they would receive revenue off of investments for it. So it would be held effectively in trust by the state of Wyoming on behalf of the corporation as the remediation instrument, and would only be utilized for that purpose. So it's a win-win where it saves money for our minerals and mining operations while simultaneously providing a better surety instrument for the state of Wyoming. So with that, walking briefly through the bill, and again, happy to answer any questions. You see that this new program is created. On page 2, we have bonding provisions that the council shall promulgate rules for the voluntary assigned trust program for coal, bentonite, trona, uranium, and then we'll also see that coal, oil, and gas and anyone else can use them as they see fit. There is some difference between how they're used. Participation in an assigned trust, you see in the Romanet 1, and this is very important. Participation in an assigned trust program shall be voluntary on the part of an operator. This is strictly opt-in. Very favorable for everybody, but strictly opt-in. On page 3, there's a calculation for the amount necessary. The payment that's voluntary into the assigned trust shall be subject to some provisions that are, first of all, communicated by the state treasurer. And then we see in the B provision, as is drafted, but this is going to be the subject of the standing committee amendment, participants must provide a 5% total annual recommendation obligation each year. On the paragraph C, participants may miss one of those every 5 years, one of those payments. The D, in the event a required annual payment is missed, the participant forfeits their interest. E, any forfeited interest shall be deposited to the state. And F, participants in the assigned trust shall provide other acceptable bonding instruments authorized by this act to cover the remaining full cost of reclamation. This is a key point. So if you had 50% in the trust of the surety requirement, the other 50% would have to remain in some other type of bonded surety requirement. And then obviously as you go up to 100% with the state, the bonding requirement external is extinguished, but the total has to remain at 100% of the requirements. So there's no decrease in the obligations for the industry. Romanet 4 talks about the investment specific for coal. Romanet 5 for non-coal. That's based on some federal regulations required for the surety, so there'll be some differences. Investment options of the treasurer shall include funds authorized by law in Romanet 6. On to page 6, Romanet 7. The participant shall deposit any cash into an irrevocable assigned trust managed by the state treasurer. The concept here is once the money goes in, it cannot come back out except for the purpose of remediation and for use of the bond in its intended purpose. On page 6, Romanet 8, any remaining amounts within an assigned trust shall be released back to the entity following full reclamation and use of the funds once it has been released. Each assigned trust shall be withdrawn until released by the director in accordance with this act. On page 7, any rules shall be promulgated that include, you can see, processing, provisions as necessary, or permits or licenses that include federal lands with a federal bonding requirement may participate in the assigned trust following approval from the appropriate federal agencies. There's a split effective date where any portion necessary for developing rules goes into effect immediately. The rest goes into effect July 1st, 2022. That's the bill. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I want to go to the Standing Committee amendment. So I'd ask that that be read in.
House Bill 45, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 3, line 17, delete.
I move Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to House Bill 45 and ask the body's favorable consideration. Mr. Chairman, as described, you can see that there is a very rigid structure. 5% minimum every year for about 20 years, where 1 in 5 years you can go below that. That is not conducive to good participation in the feeling of the Standing Committee. We see no state interest in adding a bunch of strings to how the payments should be made, how often, what the minimum is going to be, and how much is required to achieve, because there's going to be different interests for different industry. So what we did through the Standing Committee amendment, Mr. Chairman, is on page 3, we changed the minimum amount from 5% to 1%. It doesn't have to be annual, but anytime a payment is made, it has to be a minimum of 1%. That's just to make things easier for the treasurer. And then we delete the paragraphs C, D, and E so that under no circumstances would they be forfeiting their interest or required to have specific strings attached to it. This provides flexibility that was welcomed by industry, and your Standing Committee felt that there was no motivation for the state to be inflexible when we want to encourage participation in this beneficial program. With that, I'd answer any questions on the Standing Committee amendment, and if there are none, I'd ask the question.
Questions? All those in favor of Senator Rothfuss's motion to adopt the Standing Committee amendment of the whole amendment number 1 to House Bill 45, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Amendment passes. Back to the bill.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions. This is an excellent bill that is very beneficial to both industry and the state and the people of Wyoming. We're all very enthused about it. There was no objection to it, so I hope the body will support.
Questions? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Anderson's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 45, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. House Bill 45 passes committee of the whole. Next bill for consideration is House Bill 39. If we could have the clerk please read the bill.
House Bill 39, Pre-Application Determinations for Licensing, sponsored by the Judiciary Committee, an act relating to professions and occupations. Was referred to Committee Number 1, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes Senators Cooper, Kolb, Cost, and Nethercott. No, Senator French. Senator Nethercott, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Nethercott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with the due pass recommendation of House Bill 39, pre-application determination for licensing. There is a standing committee amendment. Can I have that read in?
House Bill 39, Standing Committee Amendment number 1, page 3, line 2, delete.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move standing committee number 1 to House Bill 39 and ask for your favorable consideration. Good senators, this is a technical correction that we heard in testimony to just provide the correct statutory citation. Stand for questions, ask for your favorable consideration.
Questions? Hearing no questions, all those in favor of Senator Nethercott's motion to adopt the standing committee amendment number 1 to House Bill 39, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Amendment passes. Back to the bill.
Mr. Chairman, I would call on Senator Cooper to explain this good little bill.
Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman. Little brief history on this bill. I walked in yesterday morning and Senator Nethercott suggested, my chairman suggested that I present this bill, and it was deer in the headlights, I guarantee you. So if you've never had to work for the good chairman, it's always a pleasure. With that said, this is a joint judiciary bill. And what it does is it allows persons with a, maybe that's why she gave it to me, with some sort of a nefarious past to put that a little bit behind themselves and go, as they move forward in life and go apply for certain boards. Some of these applications are pretty long and drawn out, and this allows them to go do a pre-application to determine whether or not they qualify for that board, or if their criminal past will actually preclude them from serving on that board. So that's the purpose of the bill. On page 2, it talks about who can ask for this criminal in criminal history and why they can ask for it. Then it allows line 18 through 23 talks about allowing that person to pre-apply with any of these boards. These boards could be a medical board, could be a board of nursing, could be a barber board. You know, any of them have different qualifications, and so it allows them to go out and get their pre-approval before they spend the time and the money to apply for the board. Later in the bill here, it talks about fees for the application. It allows the boards to charge the applicant a fee for applying, and that's pretty much what it does. It's pretty simple. It allows them to do their homework before they go out and get called in front of the committee and have to embarrass themselves like that. So it's a good bill. It works well.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In looking at the bill, I see that there's a list, and a few of them are just popping out. One in Title 11, 1125-201, those are gaming. I see Title 21, those are your education statutes. So I'm sure there's a list. If the committee, for someone from the committee, just can run us through what that list is, who would be eligible for this pre-application, I'd appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is every single occupation in the state of Wyoming that requires licensure through a board. There isn't one that is omitted. And so like the banking one has to do with whether or not you're going to get a banking transmitter license, right? You need approval by the board, but you may not get accepted if you have a criminal conviction. That's an example of it. So it's every single occupation or license that you can receive in the state of Wyoming is subjected to this particular bill draft. And the purpose really is for those occupations that would be subjected to it. So let's say you're in your early 20s, you get a criminal conviction of some sort. A few years later, you get yourself back on track. You decide you want to go be a nurse or a teacher. But instead of starting that educational program and committing 4 or 5 years to it, as well as the costs associated with it, where you might not get that licensure at the end of your education, this allows for you to reach out to that licensing board and say, will this criminal conviction ultimately result in my inability to become licensed as a teacher in the event I am able to get the education credentials and other requirements? And so that, I think, helps a lot of young people or anyone else thinking of changing professions get that predetermination to understand if it is a risk worth taking to invest that time and effort going down another professional occupation where they may not have had any hope in the first place. What we do know is some of our educational programs are not in a position to prohibit or eliminate many of those applicants, even though they know that they'll have no chance of licensure at the end of receiving their education. It actually happens a lot. And so this is a way for people to make wise life choices, knowing the full outcome before they invest years of their lives in an education. Again, it's a predetermination. There'd be another check at the time of licensure to make sure nothing happened between then and the time of applying for licensure. But that's the purpose and intent of the bill, is really just to provide more opportunities for people in Wyoming that might have that conviction.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, on and for the bill, in addition to that feature, you do have, with the reforms that we did a few years ago, in terms of the various criminal prohibitions that are in there, a number of the boards have flexibility to decide certain types of criminal offenses really aren't relevant to the profession in question. And the example used at that time was a game and fish violation that wouldn't be necessarily related to, say, a healthcare profession, something like that. And if there was some of those, there would be a legitimate question about. So I think this would be quite a help to people who might have something like that, or some other youthful indiscretion that was still a crime that maybe they were 18 or 19 and were a majority, but still really a youthful indiscretion on their record. So, Mr. Chairman, on and for the bill, I think it'd be quite useful.
Any other questions? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Nethercott's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 39, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. House Bill 39 is passed, committee of the whole. Next bill up is House Bill 43. If we could have the clerk please read the bill.
House Bill 43 engrossed. Trophy game, big game, and wild bison's license allocations, sponsored by the Travel Committee, an act relating to game and fish. It was referred to committee number 6, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Ellis, Guru, Landon, Salazar, and Schuler. Senator Ellis, Chair.
Chairman Ellis, you've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 43. There is a standing committee amendment, if I could have that read in.
House Bill 43, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to engrossed copy, page 1, line 5, delete.
Mr. Chairman, I move Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to House Bill 43. And for an explanation of the bill and the amendment, I would ask that you talk to Senator Salazar.
Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Honorable members, what I'd like to do is, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, is to briefly discuss the bill and then explain the amendment. So honorable members, House Bill 43, basically the overall objective of this bill is twofold. First, it establishes a consistency with a 90% resident and 10% non-resident quota allocation of bighorn sheep, moose, wild bison, mountain goat, and grizzly bear. Second, it establishes restrictions where a once-in-a-lifetime provision is in effect for licenses that permit the take of a mature male bighorn sheep, moose, and wild bison, while retaining current restrictions on grizzly bear and mountain goat, and ensuring a 5-year wait period for licenses that permit the take of juveniles and females for bighorn sheep, moose, and wild bison. So this unanimously recommended bill was brought through the Wyoming Wildlife Task Force following significant analysis, debate, and public comment. And the changes between resident and non-resident allocations consist of 90% to resident and 10% to non-resident. So Mr. Chairman, honorable members, House Bill 43 is the first recommendation brought forth from the Wyoming Wildlife Task Force. The percentage of licenses issued to non-resident sportsmen versus residents for these 5 species has been a contentious and controversial issue for several years. The task force is made up of 18 members from across all affected stakeholder groups. After over 400 hours of debate and studying the implications of such a policy change, this recommendation was unanimously passed by all members of the task force, including the outfitter representatives. House Bill 43 is supported by the majority of the outfitting industry as the right solution to the 90-10 issue. So, Mr. Chairman, honorable members, let me go through the amendment itself, the Standing Committee Amendment. So if you look at it, on page 1, line 5 and 6, we're dealing specifically with LSO staff technical corrections, as well as pages 11, line 3, 4, and 6. Those 2 sections of the amendment are LSO staff technical corrections. Pages 6, lines 1 through 5 makes it clear that those sports persons who are in the 5-year waiting period does not apply retroactively. Page 6, line 19 through 23, and page 7, line 1 deals specifically of deleting the Summers Amendment. And then finally on page 9, line 12 through 16, restores some of the original language, removing the restrictions concerning donated licenses for disabled vets or those who are wheelchair bound. So that, Mr. Chairman and Senators, is an overview of the bill. And again, I ask your recommendation first on the Standing Committee as well as the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, just real quickly, I sense that the body's ready to vote on the Standing Committee amendment. I would ask that you support it. what we did was to strip out an amendment from the other side, which would have implemented this particular bill over the next 5 years in a gradual way. And as my wonderful mother used to say, there's no good time to have a boil. So let's go ahead and have it, and that's the way the Senate committee felt about it. I hope you'll support the standing committee amendment.
Any other questions? Question being called on the amendment. All those in favor of Senator Ellis's motion to adopt standing committee amendment number 1 to Committee of the Whole to House Bill 43, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The amendment passes. Back on the bill. Any questions? Yeah. Senator Guerrero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just real quick, I to a member of TRW, and last year when this bill came up, it was brought up as a straight 90-10 bill before the committee that the governor impaneled started their work. And all of us on the committee voted and said, let's just wait for the committee to do their work and then we'll take this up. Everyone except me. And I, in a speech that harkened back to George Wallace at the schoolhouse door in Montgomery or Lester Maddox most everywhere in Mississippi about segregation, I said, 80-20 now, 80-20 forever. I'll never yield. Well, on and for the bill. When the committee unanimously voted with outfitters, with people, folks from my own community voted for it, what could I say except it is a good bill, explained well by the good senator from my part of the state, and I urge you to vote aye. Thank you.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I won't take long, but I just wanted to rise and compliment my friend from Riverton. I thought he did a great job on the bill. But there is, I just wanted to emphasize, as you take this home, because I think it certainly should pass. Our Wildlife Task Force has done a lot of work on this. I was exactly where the senator from Jackson was a year ago, just wanting that task force to do its work. Well, they did, and I support this bill. Don't diminish in your mind the change that occurs here, though. This is going to cost the Game and Fish close to $250,000 a year because of the loss of revenue to those out-of-state licenses that they sell. It will result in more licenses for your resident hunters, but please help them understand that this is going to go from being extremely rare for you to ever draw one of these licenses to very, very rare. It's not going to help much because there's just not that many of them. And so my concern in committee I brought up was I just hope that we haven't raised the expectation too high. I mean, we've done some good here, I think, for our resident hunters, but there's not a lot of these licenses, Mr. Chairman, and so that's just a couple of thoughts for you. It's a good bill. I think it's time to do this, and hope you'll support it. Thanks.
Questions? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Ellis's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, they do so with favorable recommendation of House Bill 43, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. House Bill 43 has passed Committee of the Whole. Majority Floor Leader, the desk has been cleared. Oh, yep.
Mr. Chairman, I move the Committee of the Whole rise and report.
You've heard the motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
Reading clerk, read the committee of the whole report.
Mr. President, your committee of the whole, having had under considerations bills on general file, begs leave to report as follows. House Bill 9 do pass. House Joint Resolution 1 do pass. House Bill 21 do pass. House Bill 22 engrossed do pass amended. House Bill 30 do pass. House Bill 37 engrossed do pass. House Bill 70 do pass. House Bill 86 do pass. House Bill 59 do pass. House Bill 46 do pass. House Bill 45 do pass amended. House Bill 39 do pass amended. House Bill 43 engrossed do pass amended. Senator Furphy, Chairman.
Senator Furphy.
Mr. President, I move for the adoption of the committee of the whole.
For the report, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. Committee of the whole report is adopted. All right, Mr. Majority Floor Leader, that clears the desk.
Mr. President, I move we stand adjourned until 10 a.m. Wednesday, March 2.
Announcements. Let's go back to Senator Nethercott.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Mr. President. Your number one committee will meet tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. in Capitol Extension Room 4 and online to hear the following two bills. House Bill 88, Name Change Notice Publication of Minors Amendment, and House Bill 125, Workplace Injury Assistance, Information and Guidance.
Thank you. We'll stay on the south side. Senator Scott.
Mr. President, your committee number 4, Education, will meet tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., room W110 downstairs. House Bill 31 engrossed, Wyoming Tomorrow Scholarship Program.
Senator Perkins.
Mr. Chairman, your committee number 2 appropriations will meet tomorrow morning upon noon recess in room 301 and online to take up the following bills: House Bill 63 engrossed, county and district attorney salaries and amendments, and House Bill 107 water state revolving funds amendments.
Thank you, Senator Baldwin.
Oh,
Excuse
me, Mr. President. Also, the conference committee on the budget will have a short meeting upon adjournment of the House Appropriations Committee to take up just the initial discussion with staff and to begin the conference work of the conference committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services. The Healthiest Committee in the Senate will meet tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m. in room 6 of the divider to hear House Bill 110, Board of Psychology Behavior Analyst Regulation, House Bill 117, Occupational Therapy License Compact, and House Bill 108, Funeral Service Practitioner Amendments. And we will all have our best Dr. Seuss Day gear on.
Anticipated. Senator Anderson on the north side, go ahead.
Mr. President, your favorite committee, Minerals, will meet Wednesday upon noon recess in Capitol Extension Room 4 and online. We will hear House Bill 123 engrossed, mine reclamation disposal of materials. Thank you.
Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 5, Agriculture, will meet today upon adjournment at, say, 5:25 in Capitol Extension Room W21 line to consider House Bill 3 engrossed, state land leases, House Bill 4 engrossed, water permits, livestock and federal land, and House Bill 5, wild horse and borough management. We will not get to House Bill 2. That'll be pushed till Thursday.
Senator Landon.
Mr. President, thank you for saving the best for last. Transportation Committee will meet upon adjournment tomorrow night in W2 downstairs to take up House Bill 81, Operation of Motorcycles Disabled Persons, House Bill 53 engrossed, Military Department Discrimination or Harassment Grievances, House Bill 82, Military Discharge and Benefits, and House Bill 18, Off-Road Recreational Vehicle Registration Amendments. That's if time permits, but I anticipate we'll get through all 4 of those tomorrow night, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you. Best for last. Okay, any other announcements? Any other announcements? You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. Senate stands adjourned until 10 a.m. Wednesday, March 2nd.